What is Christian love and what is its relationship to effective teaching? That's what I'm trying to answer in this video. So this video series is part of a larger initiative to try to understand how the example of Jesus Christ as the master teacher guides us in becoming effective teachers. So as we look at Jesus Christ, look at the way that he approached the world, how he approached other people, how he taught, we have kind of three categories of things that we can understand about him. We can try to understand his mind, what knowledge he had, how that then led him to interact with people in particular ways based on his understanding of them and how to effectively teach. We can look at his dispositions, which is his heart, like what were the things that motivated him, that drove him, that led him to position himself toward other people in particular ways. Or we could look at his skills, so the actual things that he did, or like symbolized in his with his hands, so like how he specifically went about teaching, like teaching in parables or asking questions or those kinds of things. For this video, I'm digging deeper into his dispositions, specifically the disposition of love. And so what we tend to think of Jesus Christ as a loving individual, the example or the epitome of love. And so I'm trying to unpack, what does that actually mean if we understand love, Jesus Christ as a loving individual, as a completely perfect loving individual, and how that relates to making him the master teacher. And hopefully, as I explore this will be helpful for us to understand what it means to be an effective teacher in a variety of settings, including in the workplace, in school, at church, or at home. So the core question that's driving this video is, what is love? Or what should be our attitude toward our learner? So if I say that I love my learner, if I say that I love my child, what does that actually mean? And how does that translate into action? How does that translate into how I actually go about teaching them and serving them? And how do I actually teach them? So when I ask this question, I might elicit some very silly kind of reactions. What is love? Or we might just brush it off and think, well, that's just a silly question. I know what love is. Everybody knows what love is, right? But in preparation for this, I did some searches online for what celebrities have said about love, trying to define it, trying to explain the relationships between people, or how they position themselves toward other people, whether it's romantically or their family members. And as I did this, I just was overcome with with a feeling of mind-numbing and soul-crushing kind of despair at how our thought leaders think about love. And as rather than share their specific quotes about love, I'm going to break it up into a few categories that I think are pretty common in our culture about how people misunderstand or misrepresent love. And so it's kind of a weird situation that we find ourselves in as a society, because unequivocally people tend to believe that love is good, or even like it rises to the level as love is itself a god that we should be worshiping. But even as they say love is good, or love is this thing that will save us, or it's this thing that we should seek after, they either don't define it, or if they do, they define it in very kind of simplistic, selfish, and even destructive ways. And some of the core ways that these misunderstandings arise are people, equate love with passion. Obviously, like lust, like most people understand, like love and lust are different things, but even if you're not talking specifically about lust or like sexual passion, people will still equate love with a passion. So love is a feeling that you have towards someone, or it's an emotion that you have towards someone. And the problem with that is, well, what happens when you no longer have that emotion, or that passion goes away? Whether that's, oh, I have a passion for helping someone. Well, what happens when I no longer have a passion for helping someone? If love is a passion, then what happens when it goes away? So it's fleeting. Another misunderstanding of love is that love is obsessive, or it's an addiction, like I'm addicted to being around a person, or it almost rises to the level of idolatry. So people either worship others or they want to be worshipped. So a lot of like women influencers will say things like this, like, I want a man who worships me, right? And that seems quite problematic for a lot of reasons. Doesn't seem like a healthy relationship if you're in the act of worshiping one another. A third misunderstanding is that love is about control or ownership. And so this is very much like a power kind of thing, where one person might feel like they say that I love someone else, but it's really just a mechanism of control over that other person, and that often leads to abuse and dehumanization. So this happens in romantic relationships with like an abusive husband, Or it also happens in families with abusive parents who might see like their children as little like mini me's, like in a narcissistic way. Like my love of my child is dependent upon how well they exemplify me and how well they reflect upon me. And so like as a parent in a situation like that, I love my child. And so I love my child insofar as I'm able to control them and control who they become. And so my love for them is dependent upon control. Another misunderstanding is that love is a need. So as I seek to love or to be loved, I'm trying to become, to achieve some level of self-satisfaction. And so this typically leads to like a transactional view of love where, I'll do things for you, I'll care for you, I'll be your friend, I'll help you, I'll be, your romantic partner or something like that, insofar as you reciprocate, insofar as you give me back what the things that I want. And so we view, in this view of love, we view the other as kind of just this transactional partner where we give and then we take. And but ultimately our goal is to take as much as we can. And so then giving just becomes a mechanism for taking more. And so we start to see the other as just a mechanism for fulfilling our own self-interest and our own self-satisfying needs. Another misunderstanding of love is that it's temporal, it's disposable, it's ephemeral. So it's like this mystical thing that we can never really like capture, never really kind of fully experience, or we might like touch it very briefly in like a beautiful kind of sunset kind of situation, but then it's gone the next moment. And so it's not something that lasts. It burns out quickly. And the last one is that often love is depicted as something that is like boundary free. There are no rules in love. There are no bonds or expectations related to love. It's chaotic. It's eclectic. I might love you right this second, but the next second I won't love you. Or like my love for you might lead me to do all kinds of treat you one nicely right now and then terribly in a few minutes. And so love is kind of this just chaotic thing, and that's what makes it so exciting, is that love is this thing that you can't pin down. It's this thing that you can't really understand. And it's this mystical thing as well. Love is not something that we can define. It's not something we can really understand. It's just this mystical power that like comes and goes, and then it might lead us to act in certain ways, and then tomorrow it's gone. So like, I think all of these views of love are not Christian views of love, and they certainly don't exemplify how Christ approached love. Some of the clearest examples of this are in movies. It's very difficult, for instance, to find a romantic comedy. I love romantic comedies, but it's very difficult to find one that depicts love in a healthy way. And so this is an image from Romeo and Juliet, which I think if you ask people like what is the greatest like love story or the most well-known love story in at least in English literature or in our in kind of our Western culture, it's probably Romeo and Juliet. And I love Romeo and Juliet. It's a great story. But to say that this is like the epitome of love is actually completely misunderstanding what Shakespeare was writing. This was not intended to be a love story. This was intended to show us what happens when we misunderstand love. It was a cautionary tale. So throughout Romeo and Juliet, there are so many opportunities. Even though Romeo and Juliet find themselves in kind of this tragic romance with one another, there are so many opportunities for them to take a step back, to employ some level of patience, some level of temperance that would prevent the eventual tragedies from occurring that occurred. But they don't do any of those things. And the point is that if you misunderstand love and if you think of it the way that Romeo and Juliet were, then it's just going to lead to destruction. It's not going to lead to anything good or lasting. So if we say that Romeo and Juliet is the epitome of love, then that just shows that we completely misunderstand the story, because it's not the epitome of love. This is a cautionary tale about what love should not be and how it does not look. One of my favorite verses in scriptures about this is from Alma 38. And here's Alma's talking to his son Shiblon. He tells him to bridle all your passions, that you may be filled with love. And I think that I read this and I find it so compelling and so insightful, because it, first of all, clearly shows that there's a distinction between passion and love. Those are two very different things. But then also it's telling us that if we don't bridle, and by bridle it's referring to like a bridle on a horse, like where you are controlling this thing, you are subjugating might be the wrong word, but you are putting this passion, you're directing this passion to be used in very specific and particular ways that are healthy and good and worthwhile. If you don't do that, then you will never experience love. So that's part of the reason that I find like so many like common cultural views of love so sad, is that if you take a view of love that equates it with passion or equates it with like unbridled interaction or something like that, then not only are you misunderstanding love, but you'll never even experience love, because you can't be filled with love. You can't be filled with this thing and experience this thing unless you actually bridle your passions. So without having said all that, what is love, or how would Jesus lead us to believe we should approach love, or what help us to understand what love is? So is love getting what you want from someone? Is it worshiping or idolizing someone? Is it making yourself feel good around someone else? Is it giving someone what they want? Is it doing what's best for them? Is it wanting good things for them? Or is it all of these things? Or is it none of these things? Or is it something else entirely? Well, this is really important, I think, both like a lot of the references I've made so far, like to romantic relationships, but it also directly affects families. It directly affects relationships between friends and between teachers and students and all those. So just in the case of parents and children, for instance, I think, my experience working with parents and children is that almost all parents say that they love their kids. And I don't challenge them on that. I believe that they actually do. But so often, how that love is manifest to their children is it takes form in a way that is ultimately destructive to the child and hurts the child. So an example of this is early in my career, I was working as a mentor for some at-risk kids. I was working with a kindergartner who was super energetic, super happy kid. He's constantly smiling, running around. But whenever he would smile, you'd see his teeth were completely black and rotten, and way worse than this picture here. And so I went to visit his mom, and I sat down with her, and he was there. He was running around, bouncing all around the apartment. And I start talking to her, trying to get to this subject of like how about his teeth. How do we help him with his oral health? Because it seemed super painful, and all of his teeth were rotten out, and it would not serve him well in life to have the same habits that he was having right now to continue into life, let alone his, right now it's hurting him. Right now he was in a very poor, like you could tell whenever he eats something, it was painful for him. And as I was sitting there talking with her, just initially getting to know her, he's running around and he runs up to her knee and she pulls out a piece of candy and gives it to him. So he runs off happy, eats it, and then, keeps running around, comes back and she gives him another one. And they keep doing this over and over again. And so finally I bring up the topic of his teeth and I start talking to her about it. And so I ask, like, well, does he brush? Like, do you have him brush his teeth? And she says, listen, like, you're not going to get him to brush his teeth. It's just impossible. Don't even try. It's not going to work. Like, okay, well, have you taken him to see a dentist? No, but, you don't need to worry about that because I know his teeth look really bad, but they're his baby teeth. They'll fall out. And when he gets his adult teeth, then they'll be fine. And so that was where we were starting from. And, as I, was reflecting on that, figuring out how to best help this family, some things became very clear to me. One is that, like, I firmly believe that this mom loved her child, that she would take a bullet for her child. But the way that she loved him, the way that it was manifesting, at least in his oral health, was not healthy for him and was not good for him. And so there were things about how that love was being manifest that was problematic. And if we're not willing to deal with that, then it's ultimately harming the child. So in his specific case, I don't think as his baby teeth start to fall out and his adult teeth start to come in, I don't think he's going to magically start brushing at that point. I also don't think the rottenness of his teeth won't be transferred to his adult teeth. I also don't think that all of his teeth will fall out at the same time. So there's just one morning he'll wake up, he'll have a fresh set of teeth, right? But so all that's to say is that the health and happiness of this child was being negatively affected by, even though his mother loved him, the way that love was being manifest was in such a way that it was actually harming the child. And we see this in a lot of parenting approaches. And so in like child development, one of the ways that they've come to articulate this is through by categorizing parenting styles in according to 4 categories. So there are 2 questions that they ask that create 2 axes on this graph. One is like, how demanding is the parent? Meaning, like, does the parent on the low end, does the parent just let the child run wild and do whatever they want and ignore the child? But on the high versus on the high end, does the parent have rules? Does the parent expect the child to behave? Does the parent expect the child to, do their schoolwork and that kind of thing? The other question, though, is how responsive is the parent to the child's needs? So is the parent on the low end, is the parent kind of cold and distracted and distant? If the child comes to them crying, does the parent just like push them away or just ignore them? Or the child asks for something, does the parent just ignore them until the 10th time when the child finally screams, then they respond? Versus on the high end, a highly responsive parent would be one who is warm, embraces the child, listens to them, reacts to them, is emotionally available to them, and that kind of thing. So as you ask these 2 questions, how demanding and how responsive is the parent, we can categorize different parenting techniques into one of 4 categories. So an uninvolved parent is completely kind of distant and kind of removed, cold in their relationship to their child, but also doesn't have any rules, kind of just lets the child run wild and do whatever they want, kind of in what might be called like a free range parenting approach. A permissive parent might still not have any demands on the child, but is very warm and responsive. So they may have very low expectations. They still let the child do whatever they want, but they're also very embracing and loving the child, constantly praising them and that kind of thing. Another approach would be the exact opposite of that is an authoritarian parent who has very high demands, like expects children to behave in very specific ways, expects them to sit very certain way at the table, to talk a very certain way. They're very rigid. They might have very strong rules and high expectations for their kids, but they're also emotionally distant. They are cold. They might not be responsive or to the needs of the child, or they might ignore the needs of the child altogether, tell the child to deal with their own problems. And then the final form is an authoritative parent who is highly responsive to the needs of the child. So they're very warm. Like if a child comes to them with a need, they respond right away. They try to help the child work through their problems. They're also like warm in the sense that they embrace the child, express love, and are available emotionally to them. But they're also demanding in terms of they have high expectations. They still expect the child to behave. They still expect the child to achieve, and often this translates into the parent and the child having discussions about what it means to be highly achieving, what it means that, like, if the child comes to you with a problem as a parent like this, you would say, well, let's talk about that. Let's figure it out together. And so you're emotionally available, but you also expect them to actually behave. And so studies on this over and over have shown that the way that a parent parents, so I mean, like in any of these categories, you could say the parent loves their child. Well, the permissive parent loves their child. Or even the authoritarian parent loves their child. They want them to be high achieving, but they think, by being distant or cold, that leads them to figure out solve their own problems. But studies have shown that the form of parenting that actually leads to the greatest benefits to children in terms of being high achieving, being healthy and well-adjusted adults is authoritative parenting, meaning that having high standards for your kids and also being emotionally available to them are both essential to help your child prevent the development of mental health disorders later in life and to be a successful, well-adjusted adult. So I just share this as an example because all of these could be termed as ways of loving a child. But if we don't define what we mean by love, then even the most ineffective, neglectful, or even abusive parenting approaches could be framed as loving. And same thing goes for teaching. Or just to say it another way, if love it means anything, then love is nothing. But if we actually really care about being good parents, then we need to understand what love should look like in an effective parenting relationship with a child. Similarly, teachers are in this situation because You could make similar arguments about a teacher, like a teacher who is warm and responsive to kids but doesn't have very high demands of them. Does a teacher love their kids? Well, yeah, but is that very effective? Or the opposite, if a teacher is has extremely high demands of kids but is not warm, is not available to them, does not praise them or encourage them, is that teacher going to be very effective? Well, no. Both, you could say, love their kids, but they don't love them in a way that is actually going to bless them and benefit their lives. And so this translates into all kinds of things about, like, how should we go about teaching in terms of what standards should we set? How should we approach failure in classes? What kinds of relationships should we build with our students? How should we approach them with an attitude of acceptance, or should we require them to adapt themselves to what we think they should be? What kinds of boundaries should we put in place? Should we approach them with kind of a gatekeeping attitude, like by going through my class, I'm trying to protect society from you if you're not ready to go into society? Or should we approach it like with a nurturing attitude, like my goal is to prepare you for moving into society? And in popular media, we see like lots of movies about teachers. I just have a few screenshots here, but like often these are not very healthy attitudes toward teaching. They're not very good models to follow, because often they fall into the similar traps to those like that I alluded to with parenting above. They might be very warm, but they're not very demanding, or they're demanding and they're not very warm, or they just do crazy, terrible things, which we'll talk about one example in a second. So if we were going to define love, we should try to define it in the way that Jesus would. So how would Jesus define love? And specifically as it relates to teaching. And so I would submit to you there are at least 5 characteristics that would define what Jesus-like love looks like in our relationships, specifically in teaching, but this applies in other settings as well. So Jesus-like love is embodied, it's free-flowing, it's proximal, it's demanding, and it's wise. And I'll talk through each of these. So first of all, Jesus-like love is embodied. What I mean by that is it's focused on a person. It is not abstract, generalist, or aggregate. Early in my career, I was working as an instructional designer. I was working with a professor who taught a class with hundreds of students in it. I was looking at some data of student performance in his class, and I was analyzing how to better serve the needs of students. And so I took the data to him and I said, listen, it looks like you've got this group of students that are not performing well on your tests. Here are some ideas that I have for helping you to better meet this group of students' needs. And he looked at it briefly, and then he kind of pushed it away and said, listen, I don't care about my students individually. I only care about them in aggregate. And the message was, it doesn't matter if, a few students or a group of students or even a majority of my students are failing. I really care about them as an aggregate group. So if you come to me talking about individuals, then I'm not interested in hearing about that. My response to that was, which I wasn't in a position to say anything about it to him, but like I was dumbfounded by that, because my understanding of Christian love is that it is focused on the individual. It's only manifest in relationship to people. And so to say that I love a group of people, but I don't love the individuals in that group doesn't make sense at all to me from a Christian sense. This same kind of mistake is repeated in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, where the brother Ivan, who is kind of the epitome of an atheist, and he's kind of the symbol of like the mind, what would happen if we purely gave in to reason without faith. He starts to describe Christian love, or how his attitude toward love, and why Christian love doesn't make sense for him in this way. He says, the more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. In my dreams, I often make plans for the service of humanity, and perhaps I might actually face crucifixion if it were suddenly necessary. Yet I am incapable of living in the same room with anyone for 2 days together. I know from experience, as soon as anyone is near me, his personality disturbs me and it restricts my freedom. In 24 hours, I begin to hate the best of men. One because he's too long over his dinner, another because he has a cold and keeps on blowing his nose. I become hostile to people the moment they come close to me. I think I can resonate with this. I think that one of the things that this points to is that loving people in aggregate, and as like saying like I love humanity, or I love my country, or I love all of my students, is very easy to say because it doesn't demand anything of us. However, if you ask me to love the student that is sitting right next to me, that is yelling or screaming, or that smells funny, or that is just not getting what it is I'm trying to teach them, that's a lot harder. And so the reason that this kind of love in aggregate attitude is so destructive, I think, and problematic, is because it's easy, and it ultimately doesn't lead to any good. Like if I say I love all of my students, but then I don't meet the needs of individual students that are struggling, that means that I don't really love all of my students at all. So to better understand this, from Jesus' own words, when he was asked by a scribe, what is the greatest of all the 612 commandments that they had, Jesus responded that the greatest is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And then the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I think this specific phrasing of this is very important. So the second great commandment does not say to love humanity. It does not say to love your nation or your people, or even your family. It says to love your neighbor. And neighbor here, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean like a landowner or like the person on the other side of the fence. But what it means is that it's the person who is close to you, the embodied, specific individual who is close to you right now. The one, so like if you're in the checkout line at the store, your neighbor is the cashier. It's the person who is right there in front of you. If you are doing a tutorial with the student, it is the student that you have sitting right in front of you. If you're meeting with your principal, it is your principal who's sitting there right in front of you. Your neighbor is whoever it is you're interacting with at that moment. And the commandment is to love them at least as much as you love yourself. And then Jesus went on to say, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments, meaning that all of the Old Testament, everything that was written in the Old Testament, it depends on these two things. So if you aren't keeping these, then we lose all of those other things in the Old Testament. Nothing else matters if you don't do these two things. But you might respond to that, say, well, wait, doesn't God want us to love all mankind? So like, why, Royce, why are you saying that we shouldn't love everyone? No, I'm saying you should love everyone, but love can only be manifest one by one. You do not manifest love to humanity in aggregate. You manifest love to humanity by individually loving your neighbors who represent humanity. And so that applies in our classrooms. You can't love your entire class while ignoring individual students. The parable of the lost sheep is the clearest example of this, where Jesus Christ left the 99. He talks about the good shepherd who leaves the 99 to go after the one. And if we were to think about love in aggregate, then the shepherd would have just stayed with the 99 and said, well, I love the sheep in aggregate, and this one went astray, and but I love the sheep in aggregate, so I'm going to stick here with the 99, and hopefully that one will come back. But Jesus' message is that our love for the fold, for the entire flock, is dependent upon whether or not we're willing to go after the one. Even, it seems, if we're putting the 99 in jeopardy. So he says he left them in the wilderness. So that says to me that our love for the 99 is only manifest in our love for the one, in whether or not we're willing to go after the one. If we just sit with the 99 and said, well, I love you all, that's actually not manifesting love, because we're allowing the one to perish. I think another way that we sometimes misunderstand this is we start to think about love in teaching as disembodied from the actual learners by focusing it on things other than people. So you can say that teaching is a process of a teacher or a parent uses a method or their role as a teacher to teach a subject or a topic to a person to achieve a purpose. So a teacher uses a lecture to teach biology to 7th graders to help them pass a test. Now, when we talk about loving in teaching, we might say that we love any of those things. Like the teacher loves being a teacher. They love their role as a teacher. Or maybe they love biology. They love their subject. Or they love the student that they're teaching. Or maybe they really love the test that they're trying to get their student to pass. Or maybe they really love preparing students for their future, or preparing the future of society, or preparing a democratic republic, or something like that, right? So there are all kinds of things that we can love in our relationship to teaching. But it's noteworthy that the second great commandment does not talk about loving a subject. It doesn't talk about loving a method or a role or a goal or some lofty ideal. The second great commandment is not thou shalt love freedom or thou shalt love equality or thou shalt love justice. It is love your neighbor as yourself. But I think sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking that, I'm in this role as a teacher. I love doing particular things. And it's fine to love, it's fine to become a high school teacher because you love math. That's fine. But if that gets in the way of you loving your students, then that's a problem. And I think that leads us to violate the second great commandment. So an example of this from popular media is the movie Mr. Holland's Opus, which I think is just a terrible example of a teacher. There is so the main character, he's a musician, he's struggling to make ends meet, and so he ends up becoming a teacher because he's failing as a musician. Over time, there's some character arc where he starts to actually like teaching, and then the finale is that he has an impact on students' lives through this process of just teaching them over, the course of many years. But there's a subplot here of in Mr. Holland's story with his own son and his wife, where as Mr. Holland is going and becoming a teacher and learning how to love teaching music to kids, at the same time, he and his wife have a son, and it turns out his son is deaf. And so his son can't enjoy the same things that he does. The son can't, or at least Mr. Holland thinks that he can't. So the son doesn't, Mr. Holland thinks, listen to music. He can't communicate. For that reason, the main character does not learn sign language to communicate with his son. He does not develop a relationship with his son. And this tense relationship. It leads to tense relationships both with the son and with the wife, where he is just completely just disconnected from his family. And in many ways, he buries himself in his work because that is where he's able to do his music. That's where he's able to be around other people who enjoy music as well. But then the emotional point of the video or the movie where things shift is when the son is now a teenager, and he starts really getting really angry at his dad and telling him in sign language as his mom translates to his dad, because his dad never learned sign language to be able to interact with his son. The son tells the dad that just how frustrated he is, that the dad doesn't think that he can appreciate the Beatles, can appreciate music and John Lennon. And then there is a turning point in the movie where the dad starts to see his son as someone who is worthy of his love or whom he should devote some attention to. But the sad part of all of it is that there is some character arc where by the end, the dad does, express his love for his son and tells him that he's beautiful and tells him how much he loves him. But the really sad thing is that in order for that to happen, the turning point was the son had to show interest in what the dad liked. The son had to show that he could appreciate music. And that was when the dad finally decided, okay, you're worthy of my love. So I see this as a very clear and deeply troubling example where a father who should have loved his son, loved his subject matter, loved music more than anything. And he allowed his love for other people to be dependent upon or secondary to his love of his subject matter. And that is deeply disturbing. That is not keeping the second great commandment. In the New Testament, the very last verses of the Gospels tells the story of when Peter and some of the other disciples were out fishing after Jesus Christ had died. And it seems like after Jesus had died, even though he'd given them some commandments of what they should be doing, they really didn't know what to do. So they went back to their previous lives. They went back to fishing, because Peter was a fisherman. And I anticipate Peter loved fishing. I anticipate that he probably loved eating fish. He loved catching fish. He loved maybe owning his own boat. He loved the freedom of being on the sea and all this kind of thing. But when Peter sees Jesus he jumps out of the boat and swims to him, and they eat together. But then Jesus has this heart to heart with Peter, and he asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" He says, "Lovest thou me more than these?" And it's not absolutely clear from John what these is referring to, but the only explanation that I've found that makes any sense, and it seems like this is the common explanation, is Jesus is referring to the fish that Peter caught. So he's saying, "Do you love me more than your profession? Do you love me more, in the case of Mr. Holland, music? Do you love me more than biology? Do you love me more than this thing, this subject matter, or this profession that you have? If you do, then go feed my lambs. Leave this and go focus on feeding my sheep." And so I take that to mean that when we as teachers approach love and how we should go about loving, it's fine to love our subject matter. It's fine to love music. It's fine to love biology. And it's great. If that got us into teaching, that's great. That's not anything to be upset about or worried about. But that should never be more important than loving our students. To say it another way, President Thomas S. Monson said that we should never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved. And in the teaching context, I take that to mean never allow meeting some learning objectives in your classroom become more important than loving the children or the students that you have in front of you. And certainly in our families, we should never allow a problem to be solved, like being sure that we're raising our children a certain way or to look a certain way or to act a certain way. Never allow that to become more important than actually loving our kids. So this is my family. It's my wife, Tori, and my 3 daughters. And as I just think about, love as embodiment, I love my family, but I don't love them in aggregate. I love them individually. And my love for them is not dependent upon, it doesn't come secondary. It's a primary consideration. So imagine if one example of this is like I enjoy playing video games, and I always have, but none of my family really do. And I've tried to get my wife and my daughters to play with me, and they will sometimes, but they really just don't enjoy it the same way that I do. Now, what if I pulled a Mr. Holland and I said, well, you know what? I love video games. You don't love video games, so I'm not going to love you. I'm not going to build a relationship with you. What kind of a terrible person would I be if I'm allowing my love for someone else to be dependent upon whether or not their interests align with mine? But often in teaching, we allow this to happen. We end up loving those in our classrooms who are maybe our best students or the ones who are most excited about our subject matter. But that's not what we're called to do as teachers. That's not what we're called to do as parents. We're called to love our children and our spouses and everyone around us, to love our neighbor as ourselves. It doesn't matter if their interests align with ours. We love them simply because they are a person there that we are expected to love. The second attribute of Jesus-like love is that it's free-flowing. Well, by that I mean it's self-existent, it's self-evident, it's freely given, it's not something that we earn, and it's not dependent upon a characteristic or a virtue or anything like that. So to understand this, let's go through a thought experiment. Imagine that I'm sitting with my wife and you're observing me talk with her. Imagine if I said to her, I love the idea of you. Like, how do you think, how would you respond to that? That's pretty frustrating, right? Or I love your potential. I love what you could be someday. Or even I love your virtues. That's better, but it's still kind of problematic, because now what happens if maybe these things that I think are virtues in someone disappear? How do those things make you feel instead of just saying, I love you? So to unpack this a little bit, let's think about like, if we were to explain to someone why we love them, like I love you because why? So imagine that you were in a survival situation, like there's an earthquake, and it's chaos, and then you find a small child that is alone and crying. You grab them and you get them to safety, and now you're in charge of them. You're in charge of taking care of them. And then maybe something happens to their parent, and then you adopt this child, and they're just yours now, and you care for them, and you are their caregiver. Now imagine if this child looked at you and said, why do you love me? Hopefully you love them. But if they said, why do you love me? What is the answer? Is it because you look a certain way? Is it because you look like me? Is it because you're cute? I mean, these children are all cute, but is that why we love them? I think the answer is, and the correct answer is, I love you just because you are you. I love you because you're you, because you're here. And so that is both beautiful and important because it tells the child that they have value just because they exist. And I think that's what Christian love leads us to do. Now, it's okay to praise someone. It's okay to say, you have, like in this child, like I think her eyes are so beautiful. She is such a beautiful child, and I could tell her that, right? And for instance, I tell my children that they're beautiful. I tell my wife that she's beautiful, and I tell them, I love particular virtues about them. I love how kind they are to people. I love how they interact with other people and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, our love should not be based on those things. So, like the fact that someone, has beautiful eyes, our love for them should not be based on that. It's okay to praise them for that, but in any praise that we give, we also need to communicate to the person that our love of them is greater than just our appreciation of those virtues. In Doctrine and Covenants 121, I think there's a similar concept when it's talking about providing chastisement to others. It says that after you do that, you should provide an increase of love toward them, that they may know that thy faithfulness is stronger than the cords of death, that your love for them is greater than anything else. My wife does an amazing job of this, and she's actually taught me this principle. Because she praises me, she praises our daughters constantly. But whenever she does, almost every single time, like we come back from a cross country meet, my wife says, to our daughter, you did a great job running. But then she'll follow it up with, but if you didn't do a great job running, if you weren't good at it, or if you just quit, would I still love you? And our daughters now have gotten to the point now, I think they still appreciate it, but sometimes they kind of roll their eyes a little bit, but they're like, yes, of course, Mom, I know that you would still love me. But that's such a powerful and important thing for a child to understand and to know, is that they are loved not because they are performing a certain way or because they have a certain virtue, but that they are just loved because they are. So love should be self-existing, self-evident, and it should not be something that is dependent upon whether or not someone is performing a certain way or looks a certain way or acts a certain way. It is something that should just exist. For scriptural support for this, there are verses throughout the scriptures that tell us that love from God toward us is free. So we're told in Isaiah, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. We don't need to pay for salvation. In Romans, it says the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. It's a gift. It's given to us. It's not payment for something that we did. It is a free gift. In Ephesians, for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. In 1 John, we love God because he first loved us. He loved us for no reason that we know of. He doesn't tell us, I love you because XYZ. He just loves us. And in Matthew, it says, freely ye have received, freely give. God's love for us is given to us freely. It's not based on any virtue that we have. It's not based on any performance we've done. It's not based on anything other than just that he loves us. So I think it's important for us to remember that we don't earn God's love. It's freely given to us, and therefore it can't be lost, but also therefore we should be freely giving it to others as well. Just as God does not love us based on our virtues or anything else, we should not be loving others based on their virtues or any other reason. We just love them just because they are. For this reason, Christian love allows us to love the unlovable, quote unquote unlovable. So Jesus was constantly with the lepers and sinners and the dispossessed and the marginalized. In Romans, we read, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. In the same way, our love for our children, our love for our learners should be self-evident, should not be be corruptible, should not be able to be destroyed by being dependent upon anything else. It should just exist. So Christian love flows freely as an eternal gift. As it flows freely to us, we are expected to allow it to flow freely through us to others so that people can experience God's free love for them through us. Third, Jesus-like love is proximal. What I mean by this, it's in close proximity. So that means it's close, it's warm, it's inclusive, it's all-embracing, and it's peacemaking. So remember when Judas led the Romans to capture Jesus, and Peter cuts off Judas's ear. Jesus then moves in and heals Judas. He heals the betrayer. He gets close to him, he touches him, and he heals him. There are a lot of false notions about this floating around out there. This is a current, and interestingly, this was recently a political topic because a political leader, I'm not going to name him here, but he actually referred to theology on this, and so that's why we're talking about it, because this is a common theological concept that people believe that is, I'll argue is wrong. But they argue that there is something called ordo amoris. So this is Latin. It means there is an order of love. And this comes from Augustine. And in ordo amoris, the idea is that first you love God, then you love yourself, then you love your brother, then you love your own body, then you love your household, then you love your friends and acquaintances, then your countrymen, the household of faith, and then other people, if you have love left over. And this came up recently because a prominent politician said, you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. And he's arguing not just that this is a reasonable way of approaching policy, but he's arguing this is what Christian love demands, is to go in this order. This is a really problematic way of understanding Christian love, and I would argue it's a completely incorrect way of understanding Christian love. To give you a little bit of historical background on this, Ordo Amoris comes from Augustine, who in many ways was taking Greco-Roman philosophy and trying to make it a bit more Christian, so kind of sprinkling in Christian ideas into it. So he's taking the philosophies of Greek and Roman philosophers and adding in some scriptures to try to make it justified. This is the kind of attitude that the Romans had. So you think about when Jesus was brought before Pilate, he was treated quite differently than Paul was when Paul was brought before Agrippa and others. Paul had many more rights. He was treated much more kindly and fairly than Jesus was. And the reason was that Paul was a Roman citizen. And so Romans, in a Roman view, there's a very hierarchical order to people and to life. And so the highest order is, we serve Caesar, but then, there's this very structured hierarchical Roman system of government and who has power and who deserves our attention and who has, who deserves us to treat them well. And then at some point, you get to a point where if all this applies to Roman citizens, but then if someone is not a Roman citizen, then they're further down. And then if they're a vassal, and then if they're a slave. And so Jesus was not a Roman citizen. Paul was, so Paul deserved greater love in the view of Romans than did Jesus. So this idea is a Roman idea. It's no coincidence that Ordo Amoris is Latin. And so this is where it comes from. It doesn't come from Scripture. There is no Scripture that tells us to prioritize love in this way. And in fact, when this political leader said this, there was a direct response from the Pope about this specific topic. And so Pope Francis said, Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. And shortly thereafter, Pope Francis died, and Pope Leo became the new pope, and he reiterated this same message. He said, Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others. Christian love is not about ranking, creating orders of love. Pope Francis followed up that if we want to understand the true order of love that must be promoted, is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. That is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. So let's look at the parable of the Good Samaritan for a second. To try to understand, what love should look like. Is it like this hierarchical structure of concentric circles of I love people close to me, then more distant, then more distant? And so the story was that there was a man traveling from Jerusalem. He was on this dangerous road. He gets attacked and robbed and left for dead. Then a priest passes by, a Levite passes by. They both ignore him because it's dangerous to stop. And then a Samaritan stops and helps him. A Samaritan in Jewish culture was viewed as an outsider. They were unclean. They were not just unclean, they were abominations. They were heathens. They worshipped a different god, and they were seen as being corrupters of the right way of God. But the Samaritan stopped. He helped the man. He put him on his animal. He took him to an inn. He paid the innkeeper to care for him. So he saved this man's life, and not only did the bare minimum, but he did far above and beyond what was needed to help this man. And the message from this is that, when Jesus told this parable, his follow-up question was, who was the neighbor to this man? So who loved him the way that the second great commandment demanded? He said it's the Samaritan that did it, even though the Samaritan was very distant culturally from this man. The people who were closer, the Levite and the priest, they were very close culturally to this man, but they're not the ones who were his neighbor. The one who stopped and loved him was this person who was far distant from him and culturally distant from him. The message from this, I think Kierkegaard summarizes really well. He says, to love one's neighbor means essentially to will to exist equally for every human being without exception. This means that if we are to exemplify Christian love, that means we should never ask, well, how different is this person from me? How distant are they? Are they part of my family? Are they part of my culture? Are they part of my nation? Are they, how different from me are they? That should never be a consideration in determining whether or not we should love someone. Our love for them should break all of those barriers, and we should be willing to equally love everyone, just as the Samaritan loved the wounded man on the road. Modern prophetic guidance supports this interpretation. President Nelson recently taught that during the Savior's earthly mission, he constantly ministered to those who were excluded, marginalized, judged, overlooked, abused, and discounted. So those who are very different and distant. As his followers, can we do anything less? The answer is no. We believe in freedom, kindness, and fairness for all of God's children. Let us be clear. We are brothers and sisters, each of us the child of a loving Father in heaven. His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, invites all to come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female. It behooves each of us to do whatever we can in our spheres of influence to preserve the dignity and respect every son and daughter of God deserves. In contrast, Jesus explained at multiple points to folks that if they only love those who are closer to them in the kind of ordo amoris kind of way of thinking, those who are like you, your family, your political allies, your friends, if you love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the tax collectors the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the tax collectors so? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. So what does a Christian do if someone is distant from them? Do we follow this kind of ordo amoris approach to think, if they're distant from me, then they don't deserve my love? Or, well, maybe I'll love them if I have some love left over after I've first loved those who were closer to me. Brian Stevenson taught a really powerful lesson about this. He wrote the book Just Mercy. And in a lot of his talks, he talks about the power of proximity. And he explains that if you're willing to get closer to people who are suffering, you will find the power to change the world. When Brian Stevenson is a Harvard-educated lawyer, he worked heavily in the South, to help exonerate wrongfully incarcerated inmates on death row. And what he found was that, and he explains this in lots of different talks that he's given, is that nationwide in the United States, there are people who do care for other people. They are Christian. They do love their neighbor. But the problem is that they're so distant from other people who are different from them that love does not extend to the people who are distant or different from them. And so he argues that the way to address historic and ongoing injustices and abuses in our society is for us to get closer to one another. The issue is not that we don't understand how to love. The issue is that we're too different and too distant from one another, and we need to remove that distance and become closer to one another if we are going to actually act on our love for one another. President Hinckley also used to talk about this a lot. One of the poems that he liked to quote often was from Edward Markham. He said, so it's talking about someone who is different from me or distant from me. It says, he drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took him in. In this way, I think we're starting to see that Jesus, like love, embraces lepers, tax collectors, sinners, foreigners, victims, oppressors, enemies, and death row convicts. Jesus' love embraces everyone, and it is not based upon how different or distant someone is from us. But rather, if someone is distant from us, the Christian answer is to get closer to them. Christian love means getting closer to those distant from us so that we can love them more, not using our distance as an excuse to love them less. The Samaritan came closer to the wounded man to help him, versus the Levite and the priest, they looked away and they got away from him as quickly as possible. They increased their distance from him. Fourth, Jesus-like love is demanding. So discipleship is hard. It's based on the same word as disciplined. They have the same root. It's difficult, it's challenging to love the way, as we love the way Jesus did. It demands certain things. It means that we have high expectations of others. It means that we honor others' agency. And it means that we're focused on others' needs and wants. So an example of this is when the rich young ruler came to Jesus and asked him what he needed to do to enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said, keep all the commandments. And the ruler said, well, I've done all those things since my youth. And then Jesus gave him an even harder demand. He said, well, then go and sell everything you have and come follow me. So the rich young ruler refuses to do this, or at least we don't know what happens after that, but he goes away sorrowing. It says because he had many riches and he wasn't willing to give them up. So I think this shows that, Jesus didn't force the young ruler to give up his riches. He didn't tell him, he didn't, take away his agency, but he also didn't, tell him, it's not a big deal if you're not willing to do these things that I'm asking you to do. He did have high expectations, and but when the rich young ruler chose not to live by those expectations, Jesus didn't, equivocate and didn't say, well, okay, that doesn't really matter. He was still quite demanding. C.S. Lewis once explained that what we would really satisfy us would be a God who said of anything we happen to like doing, what does it matter so long as they are contented? We want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven, a senile benevolence, who, as they say, liked to see young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. We often hear this kind of thing like, well, if God loves me, he should let me do whatever I want. He shouldn't care about whether or not I keep the commandments, or he shouldn't give me commandments at all. And C.S. Lewis is responding to that no, a loving father gives you commandments. He gives you rules. What people are arguing for is they typically are saying, I want a grandfather who just loves me and lets me get away with anything and spoils me, but in kind of a senile benevolence kind of way. But in Luke, we read that Jesus explains that if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. This is not an easy thing that he is asking us to do. Jesus was sacrificed for us. He willingly went to Golgotha and Calvary. He carried the cross that he was crucified on. And now he's telling us that we need to do the same thing. We need to follow him and carry our own cross. That is a hard thing to ask. Flannery O'Connor, in her life, she found herself often responding to atheists. And specifically, one argument that she would always hear is that, well, people just believe in God because it makes them feel good. It's like a warm and fuzzy feeling. you don't want to deal with the harsh realities of life, and that's why you believe. And she found herself constantly explaining that what people don't realize is how much religion costs. They think faith is a big electric blanket, when of course it is the cross. It is much harder to believe than not to believe. If you feel you can't believe, you must at least do this. Keep an open mind, keep it open toward faith, keep wanting it, keep asking for it, and leave the rest to God. And the point here is, again, that discipleship, following Christ, means it's hard. It requires discipline. Requires sacrifice. And for that same reason, if we are in the position of Christ is the master teacher telling us to follow him, if we are now in the position of teachers, often that means that we have to be quite demanding. We have to ask people to do hard things. So there are some common pitfalls with demanding this, though. Like, on the one hand, oftentimes people will not recognize the need to be demanding, so they won't have high standards for their learners, or for their children, or they will do things so that their learners or children will avoid struggle, will avoid hard things and failure, or prevent them from ever having to do anything difficult. That is really problematic because it doesn't allow us to grow. It doesn't allow us to be strengthened in ways that we need to. On the flip side, though, there's an authoritarian approach to demandingness that is equally, if not more, destructive, and that is imposing our standards on others without vision or buy-in, without them actually wanting those standards imposed upon them, or imposing our standards on others in ways that are denying agency. So again, with the rich young ruler, Jesus didn't force him to follow him. He only made the demand of the young ruler to sell everything he had, because the young ruler came to him and asked him, this is what I want. I want to follow you. I want to inherit the kingdom of heaven. What do I need to do? That's when Jesus told him what was required. So the solution is that we can't do the work for our learners or for our children, but we can provide the vision, the encouragement, and the support needed for them to succeed. And so demandingness is merely a mechanism for helping the beloved achieve what they deeply desire. So we're demanding for the purpose of helping someone achieve what they want that is good. Sometimes I fear we approach parenting similar to how we might react if a ball rolls into a busy street and a little child goes running after it. For the safety of the child, we might shout and scream and run after the child and even scoop them up and physically drag them out of the street. And that's certainly appropriate to save the life of the child in that situation. But if we ever found ourselves in that situation, which I've done this very specific thing with my children before. But afterwards, the child is upset and sometimes crying. We sit down with them and explain, okay, this is why we can't run after balls that go into the street. But I fear that oftentimes in parenting and even in teaching, we treat far more situations like this than we should, or even we treat all situations like this. We think that it is the parent's job to force the child to do certain things, or to force the child, no matter what it takes, to prevent them from experiencing failure or struggle or anything like that. This is a very specific case because the cost is so very high and the child is so very young and inexperienced that it makes sense for the parent to engage in that way. But we should not, for instance, if a teenager, wants to quit sports that we like we should not react in the same kind of way, right? As an example, this is my youngest daughter, Josephine. She's kind of a prodigy on the violin. She's been doing it for only about a year and a half, but she's really good. But this requires us as her parents to, encourage her and require her to be demanding of her to do her daily practices because it's something that she wants to excel at. And she's decided, I want to do this, but sometimes in the day-to-day, she'll come to us almost every day and say, do I have to do practice today? And we're like, yes, you do. You need to go practice this because this is something you've decided that you want to do. And so these are the rules that we're following. But honestly, if she did decide, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm tired of the violin, we would be supportive of that because we want her to be able to exercise her agency at all. So we want her to be able to exercise her agency. So we should be demanding in terms of helping our learners and our children to achieve the things that they want. But ultimately, as our children develop, become older, and are able to make decisions for themselves, we should honor their agency, even if it goes into like I think it would be terrible if she gave up the violin, but I honor her agency more um, than I guess how it makes me feel if she gave that up. And then finally, Jesus-like love is wise. By this, I mean that it's self-reflective, it's humble, it's adaptive, it's increasingly effective over time, and it seeks for wisdom. Um, and so St. Thomas Aquinas defined love as willing the good for the another. To love is to will the good of another. And I think this is probably the best succinct definition of love that I've ever found. But because there's so much embedded in this. And so if I will the good for you, if I am actively willing goodness for you, that means I'm going to do things that make goodness come about in your life. And if I, for instance, find myself doing things that are harming you or that are not effectively bringing about goodness in your life, then I will change that to bring about goodness in your life. So an example of this came about on my mission. I was on a bus traveling from the Crimean Peninsula from Simferopol, from Mariupol to Donetsk. So sorry, it wasn't in the Crimea Peninsula. It was between Mariupol and Donetsk. And we were on this bus, and we passed a crash on the highway that just happened, and so the bus slowed down just enough. It's just like 20 seconds that we were passing, and so I only saw this very fleeting scenario unfold very quickly. But a car was laying on its side, and there was a woman who had been thrown from the car, and her body was on the pavement, and her torso, so about where her waist was under the car. So the car was on its side and covering her legs. And so 4 or 5 men who saw the accident, wanted to help, they rushed up to the scene to help her. And thinking the best thing to do would be to move this car off of her, they all put their shoulders to the side of the car and they pushed it so that it would roll off of her. But unbeknownst to them, she was pinned under the car in such a way that as the car started to roll away, she went with it, and so it jerked her up, and it ended up, I'd imagine, injuring her even worse than she was already injured. And then we were past, and I didn't see what happened after that. So it was a very gruesome kind of scene. But as I reflect on that, I do think there are many times in our lives that are similar to this, where we have someone that we love or that we want to help, and we rush to their aid. And it's good that we rush to their aid. It's good that those men rush to help that woman. But then because we don't maybe fully understand the situation, we don't understand everything that may be needed to help them, maybe even as we start to help them, maybe we actually don't help them at all, or maybe even we hurt them a little bit. We actually end up, our good intentions are actually harmful. What do we do after that? And I left this scene wondering, just thinking about those men and how they must be feeling, because they tried to do something good and it ended up harming the woman who was in the accident. And so in my own life, if I, for instance, am trying to help my child and I end up, in my willingness and excitement to help them, if I end up hurting them, what do I do after that? Well, I think that there are a couple of bad choices we might make. We might leave that situation thinking, well, okay, I'm just not going to help people anymore. I'm not going to rush to their aid. If I see another person in need who's been in an accident, I'm just going to turn around and walk away because I don't want to cause more harm to them. I don't think that's the right answer. Another solution would be for these men to say, well, we did our best, and yeah, we maybe harmed the woman, but we couldn't have been expected to know any better, so I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. If I come across another wreck, I'm going to behave the exact same. I'm going to run up and I'm going to do what I think needs to happen. I think that also isn't the right answer, because that means you're not learning from the situation. I think the correct answer is to still desire to help people and to still commit to help people you find in need, but also learn from the situation that now I better understand car wrecks, I better understand the needs of people who might be suffering. And so I'm going to change how I go about helping them in the future. Paul talked about this very idea in his letter to the Philippians. He said, "In this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment." This means that our love should grow as we learn more, and it should change and adapt as we learn more and as we gain better judgment. That ye may approve things that are excellent, that ye may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ, unto the glory and praise of God. So for this reason, when we are trying to help someone, trying to express love for them and will the good for them, it's this simple thing we can do is just ask them, what do you need? Not assume that we know what they need, or how can I help you, or what would help you learn better. And one question that I like to ask, I actually ask my wife this pretty frequently. I ask my daughters this as well, is how can I love you better? Because if the goal of love is to bring about goodness in the other person's life, who else to better help us understand how to do that than the person themselves? And if we ever find ourselves either trying to express love that is ineffectual, so we're not actually helping the person by how we're enacting love toward them, or that is even harmful, then that should give us pause, and we should learn from that and become wiser and adapt our love to better meet the needs of the person as a result. So bringing these together, I do believe that Jesus-like love is embodied, it's free-flowing, it's proximal, it's demanding, and it's wise. And that if we are going to love our children, to love our learners, the way that Jesus did, the way that the master teacher did, then this is how love should look. And in the end, I think that if we really want to understand how Jesus loves us, we need to look to his own words, because, and specifically, I think the parable of the Good Samaritan and the parable of the Good Shepherd tell us exactly what is demanded of us, both in our parenting and in our teaching situations that we find ourselves in. And so I am grateful for Jesus Christ. I'm grateful for the model of love that he gives to us and shows us. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.